Hi, I'm Chris Williams. I'm the CMO at Arima Data, and I did a presentation on December 6th at the CMA measurement conference and wanted to capture it on video so I could share it with people who didn't who weren't there. So that's what this is, and I'm going to be posting it to LinkedIn. Of course, if there's any questions and comments, we can put them up on LinkedIn, or you can email me at chris@arimadata.com to have a conversation about anything, questions, comments that you would have about the presentation. So let's just jump in and get going with this. Let's add that to the stream. Here we are. So two things that we wanted to talk about. One is marketing mix modeling, and the other one is synthetic data. In our opinion, these are the two biggest things that are happening in the Canadian media marketing place right now. So I wanted to talk about some of the things that led us here. Of course, when we talk about synthetic data, one of the first questions is, what is it? And then we get into things like connected implications, the issues that come out of those things. And of course, at the end, we want to talk about where we want to take it. The place to start, of course, is one of the questions about marketing mix modeling that's brought up, especially in a digital sphere, is it's just probabilistic. And that's kind of seen as a criticism of marketing mix modeling. However, what I want to talk about at the beginning is just an idea of just comparing what's called deterministic data versus probabilistic data, with the intention of coming to the point that MMM as probabilistic is essentially better than anything else that we've got going. That the probabilistic aspect of it isn't a problem, and that the deterministic data isn't as deterministic as we'd like to be. In other words, everything is essentially probabilistic. And where that starts is, back here in 2014, when I was president at IAB Canada, the issue landed on the table about bots. And literally billions of dollars were being lost into the programmatic and digital advertising systems, and literally it meant that the data, the numbers that we were counting, were not as deterministic as everyone thought they were, and it was very clear that there's a lot of work to be done in order to make them a lot more accurate. And so we did studies, and this is the study that we did in the Canadian marketplace, which duplicated that to understand that it wasn't just in the US that this was happening. And again, the World Federation of Advertisers looked into it and saw the same thing. So again, it sort of comes back to, of course, we want to have deterministic numbers, but the numbers that we're actually working with in digital are far more in the area of probabilistic, along the lines as what we would use with MMM. We learned a lot from the Media Rating Council around how things get measured, and also in terms of the platforms and the understanding of the audit and accreditation process, and determining just how accurate these things were. And that's a longer journey, that understanding how things, the guidelines are being written, and how the audit and accreditation process reflects back to the guidelines and the various companies that get audited and accredited to determine how good their data is. Even within that very buttoned down atmosphere of the MRC audits and accreditation process, along their definitions of guidelines, there's a myriad of various definitions. And in this case, you can see these are audited and accredited numbers or metrics. And even there are differing definitions of what an impression is. And so all of those are being mixed together. Depending on how you're running your campaign, you could be using multiple different currencies. Again, it means that what we think of as precise and deterministic is actually not that precise and deterministic. It's still directional. Also, we understand that it takes time to separate the bots from the human traffic, and that's again, when we look at the numbers that we see in these platforms, numbers that are being reported, what it means is that if you look at them and think that it's happening in real time, that's not actually the case. It takes a fair amount of time to run the programs to separate the bots from the human traffic. And what it looks like here is, in this case, this is Google's example of it, is they will say that it takes up to 3 months to actually reconcile the numbers and issue credits where they found invalid traffic within the systems. And a lot, of course, depends on how you buy, where you buy, and what the incentives are in terms of the campaign that you're trying to run. If you have very strict sort of CPA goals and you're trying to drive that cost really far down, you might be introducing a fair amount of bot traffic into your buy, which means that the number is going to be higher. The MRC also looked at the outcomes. And again, when we think about sort of the ability to say, okay, we have a cost per acquisition number that we're trying to hit, and it's very, thought of as deterministic. We have to understand that that's based on conversion pixels. And when we want to measure those things, as the guidelines point out, is that we have to filter the conversion pixels as well for sophisticated invalid traffic. Human, a company that does this, they used to be called White Ops, and they were the original company that came out back in 2014 with a study that looked at the billions of dollars being lost in advertising to bots. They're also pointing out and have products that address the bots that are on lead generation pages, those kinds of things. And of course, they have some numbers that talk about the differences on how much of the actual what are seen as leads or acquisitions, how much of those are actually fake. And of course, it depends on what category you're in and how you buy. But again, it's sort of, why don't I just continue hammering on this idea that deterministic is actually probabilistic? In addition to that, we have the degradation of signals coming from the browsers. Third-party cookies are degrading as time goes on. At what point in time that happens, who knows? But also we have Apple dealing with their own browser, and of course the things that they're doing with email addresses. So that means that the signals that we that are based on that help determine deterministic data is actually it doesn't really have as much future as they have had in the past. So if we kind of understand this and say, look, sophisticated invalid traffic detection is not being applied across all of the conversion pixels. It's not happening in real time. It's not being applied consistently across all of the various media suppliers that we might be using in a campaign. This concept of deterministic it has some very serious problems. And so when you compare things like a multi-touch attribution versus an MMM, and the idea that multi-touch attribution is more accurate or much more deterministic, that's actually not the case. But what we do have is on the MMM side, even though it is seen as probabilistic, is a much broader scope of all the various media and marketing efforts that can go into the plan. So it's not just digital media, it can include coupons, flyers, all of the other stuff that the marketer can choose to put some money into, but it also includes things like competitive factors, landscape factors. And what I mean by landscape, it could be interest rates, could be inflation, could be COVID, it could be weather. All of those things can affect your sales. And then when we think about the outcomes, it's not just digital sales, we're including, of course, store sales and any other types of sales that can be brought into the mix. So this is what it ends up looking like when you do a marketing mix model and the attribution across all the channels. You've got, starting off with the left-hand side, you've got some negative factors. You've got competitors who are stealing some of your sales. You've got landscape factors. In this case, it's COVID that is affecting sales. And in this case, it's actually positive because, if there's a lockdown, people will actually go out and buy your product. There are other factors like trade promotions, which have an enormous effect on sales in the short term. And then, of course, you get into the media factors. And it means that you're putting everything together into one place. And that means that blue bar, that's your actual sales. And these are all the factors that are influencing all of those sales at the end of the day. It gives it a very broad scope of what the marketer and the agency can look at to understand where are those sales coming from. You can also go down into the channels and say, listen, I need to understand at a deeper level, what is the return on ad spend for each of those channels, and how effective or efficient is it at driving sales over the period of time that the model exists? Well, it starts over on the far right-hand corner there. It's a very small number, but it says $14 for every dollar in the last 2 years that have been put into marketing and into media. It's yielded about $14 worth of spend $14 worth of sales have come from that spend. And here it is allocated across each of the channels in terms of their efficiency over the period of time. And then the purple bars are the next dollar spent. So it gives you an idea of like the return on investment on the curve, right? Because not every dollar is going to be applied the same way. Now, this is the basis of some efficiency to say, listen, if we've got more money or if we have to reallocate some money, let's start looking at the broadest spectrum of all the media that we've had in play, and where can we reallocate the money so that we can raise the efficiency across the overall campaign. Now, marketing mix modeling as well is not just being done by analog players. We've got the digital platforms that are very, very interested in getting into this area. Both Google and Meta have products that are available in Canada to deliver marketing mix models. So they're going beyond what multi-touch attribution has been in the past to say this is where they're going. And so if they're moving into MMM in a big way, which they are, it means that the market should pay attention to what that means and the implications of actually providing all of that data into these ecosystems. The MMM doesn't need to be the same way that it used to be. Like MMM was invented way back in the 1940s, early 50s. And now we have bigger computers, we have faster data, we have bigger scopes of data to work with. So we want to evolve what MMM means. And that means making it live and continuous, faster, cheaper, easier to execute, allowing different shares of views so that publishers and advertisers and agencies can look into the data and extract some of the insights that exist within the data structure. And then, of course, down towards the bottom, we want to talk more about geodata being brought in and the ability to look at search. And search is a really interesting area that needs to be added into the sort of the understanding of what we can do with MMM and media planning. Typically, what we want to do is map everything out from a geographic perspective when it comes to MMM and also from a media planning area. We want to line things up. And so when we look at this, what we've done is looked at search activity by FSA in Montreal. That allows us to understand where the hotspots that are coming through on branded search terms, and those activities have been generated typically by upper funnel activity. Broadcast generates this volume of interest in the product on those branded keyword terms. And then from there, we have to convert over on the website based on these people who have an interest in the product and those branded keyword terms. But we can also overlay other things like where are the retail outlets, where are the out-of-home media products. Having this geographic approach allows us to see things at a broader perspective and sort of coordinate all of the digital and analog types of media into one view as to what's going on. And search kind of sits nicely in the middle, in between the upper funnel and the lower funnel, to understand, what is the value of that volume of interest in your brand's products, and how do we get more sales out of that. When we think about optimizing from the MMM, we don't want an MMM that just sits on the shelf and says, oh, that's the numbers that we saw and we don't do anything with it. We want to make it actionable. And that starts looking into how can we increase the ROAS in a channel? Well, we can look at cross-media reach and frequency management. Are we driving too much spend and too much frequency? Can we cut back in certain areas? Can we find different audiences that we need to target, whether it's a geographic audience, whether it's a demographic that we haven't targeted in the past, or maybe it's looking at the retail footprints. Maybe we're reaching a lot of people that actually can't buy the product because we don't have a store in their area. Those are views that allow us to use the MMM in ways that haven't been tested before or haven't been used in the past, but also allow us to think about, again, going back to geography and saying, let's take some areas out of this sort of campaign and let's do A/B testing based on geographies. Can we get higher ROAS numbers by isolating an area and changing something, changing the creative, changing the amount of money that's been spent in media or the media composition, or try a new medium in the mix to achieve a better number at the campaign level? Now, what that means when we start thinking about all of this stuff that we can do with MMM, what it means is the next step is we need to have a quantum leap forward on how we get audience data in Canada for this media planning and media optimization. And what that means is that we have to start thinking about it from a cross-media perspective and bringing these data sets together. And where that started was the MRC, back to their guidelines on cross-media measurement, which we were involved in, and understanding, okay, we've got these disparate data sets coming from different media sources. How can we deduplicate reach and frequency at the campaign level for the advertiser, in the Canadian market? The World Federation of Advertisers took up the call and said, okay, well, let's take this and go to the next step. They wrote up this document, which is available online. You can go read it. And it is establishing the principles and the framework at which cross-media measurement will work. And there's a lot of good reasons behind that talk about the value to the advertiser as to how can we optimize, these campaign approaches and get the kind of data in front of them that they need to perform what they need to do in terms of managing these campaigns. The next step from there was the World Federation of Advertisers creating the technical blueprint. That was a working group, and it included both Google and Meta at the time to see how could they take their different campaign data and bring it together to deduplicate that reach and frequency. Conceptually, in the middle of that technical blueprint, you can see that this particular area focused in on something called virtual people IDs. And this is where we start to begin to think about synthetic data, because we're talking about virtual people and the ability to apply impressions to each virtual person to see what kind of different impressions they got. It becomes very complicated stuff. However, to try and make it simple, let's just talk about what synthetic data actually looks like. A simple analogy is to think of it as a very accurate game of SimCity, where the map is actually a map of Canada, broken out into all the 800,000 or so postal codes so that we map it out very accurately. And then you take the census data and you can apply the 38 million citizens of Canada against that map. And then once that's all put together, then you have a model of the country, literally the population against the map. And then you can apply a lot more variables into each of those synthetic individuals. And that allows us to then query the database to say, these are the areas that we want to learn more about, or these are the types of media options that are available. Again, querying each synthetic individual and bringing that back into a cross-media planning tool, or other types of tools like location intelligence, things like that. But essentially the game is the same, right? It is just a much more accurate map with a lot more variables applied to each of the synthetic individuals within that model. And you think, well, how does that work? It sounds like it's just a little bit airy-fairy, but it's not. It's actually coming out of the medical industry, right? And the medical industry has some very serious privacy issues when it comes to dealing with medical research data, especially if you're dealing with medical research against children. And in this case, we have this guy, Khalid El-Amam, who is working out of the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. And he's written this book about his uses of synthetic data to do the research that they need to do to uncover new drugs, new methods of treatment for children in a medical sphere. And so they've invented a lot of synthetic data that allows them to do that. Within the book that he wrote, he talks about the whole privacy implications and basically is putting out there that because synthetic data does not come from a real person at the individual level, is then there is no risk of re-identification. And that has huge implications going forward in terms of the applicability of privacy law to synthetic databases. As you can see here, the point is that GDPR does not apply to a synthetic database at the individual level. Same thing with PIPEDA, the upcoming bill C-27, the US patchwork of laws at the state level. None of that applies to a synthetic database of individuals. They're not real people, but the model actually models what's happening in the real society. So it is a highly useful database without all those privacy implications. We also have to recognize that any other database is a subset of the national database. So if you think you have a proprietary database within Canada, yes, portions of it are part of the national database. Now, it doesn't mean that all the detail is there, but it does mean that it is an ability to mix and match within a synthetic database so that you have almost 100% match rates between any first-party data set and the synthetic society or synthetic populations that we have in existence. So let's just put these two concepts together and see how powerful they are, because we've talked about MMM, we've talked about synthetic data, and let's put it into the various tasks from a marketing perspective. We have media planning tasks, campaign delivery, media currency, and marketing outcomes to measure. And synthetic data does a really good job on the media planning side and understanding campaign delivery, deduplicating campaign delivery. On the outcome side, we have MMM. Now, when we start to fuse those two data sets together, so you've planned and you delivered a campaign, and you can look at the ROAS on a per channel level, then you've created a full loop. Essentially what it is, as in digital, you have a conversion pixel to create that loop. In this case, MMM is creating that feedback loop back into the population to say, we're now doing MMM-based media planning. All that sales data and the insight data on the ROAS can be brought back into the next plan so that it can be used as the campaign objective in the media plan going forward. But more importantly, we can even go further than that, because the synthetic data set is national. It includes a lot of other data that can be brought into the mix, which includes business planning data and business outcome data, which has a much broader scope than literally just the marketing side of things or just the media side of things. And that's where you get into this area of it's a whole data science driven marketing around business growth. As an example, what I'm talking about is this study that Winston worked with Coke. And they're just basically trying to figure out what are the best locations for 26,000 vending machines from Coke, using the synthetic data, using some mobility data, and optimizing these locations so that they can improve the sales at the vending machines. Has nothing to do with media, has nothing to do with media planning. It's a business challenge that's put in front of us. And that synthetic population can be used to help Coke achieve those objectives. So it comes back to asking a question. Once we put this synthetic data out there and this MMM data, what if we changed our frame of reference around the conversation that's happening in marketing these days? So much of that conversation is happening around identity and pixels and attribution, within digital. Well, what if we said, let's just put that on the back burner a little bit, and let's put this on the front burner. Let's talk about what the implications are of synthetic data, geography, and MMM as being the primary, because of the scope of the operation across digital and analog, across business and media, and say, well, where does it go from here? Well, potentially there's some other sort of bycatch kind of things that might happen as we move forward, not using all of this identity stuff and using synthetic populations instead. Potentially we could reduce the carbon footprint of all of the advertising that happens in the digital sphere. Potentially we could lose some of that data exhaust that's happening through the programmatic place, where Johnny Ryan is suggesting that this is a giant data breach, or Dr. Fu is suggesting that there's a lot of problems around the amount of money that's being spent and the ongoing sophisticated invalid traffic and the money going to bad players and being lost in the system. Maybe those things go away with a more rigorous approach around the use of synthetic data, geography, and MMM. Perhaps we can look at it from a local media perspective to say it does a better job supporting, domestic media. Perhaps it does a better job of clarifying, the value of responsible media in the whole system, according to what GARM does. Potentially, we look at the areas of hyperlocal media, where you're into, small town media, smaller cities, where the options are at the out-of-home level, and local newspapers, local radio. How can we support that better through the use of these synthetic populations? But also, how can we build those things into the tools so that it makes it much more easy to actually get the money and build out the ability for us to plan and send money towards local media operations, knowing that we can measure it at the MMM side to prove that it is actually being effective against the advertisers' objectives, so that it's a win-win-win situation for everybody involved. So lastly, it becomes the question of, well, what's the plan? If these are the two things that we need to focus on, marketing mix modeling and synthetic data, the first place is we need to really focus on getting those data feeds in a good place. What I mean by the data feeds are the sales data coming out of the advertiser and the media spend data coming out of the agencies or the buyers. Those two things need to be speeded up and made far more robust in terms of getting that data into the MMM models. We also need to think about connection for media activation. So that's pulling those insights from the marketing mix model and the insights from the synthetic data populations, so that we can then take those theoretical reach frequency forecasts and say, okay, well, let's buy based on that. How do we use synthetic IDs? How do we use postal codes? How do we use various other types of geographic approaches to say, how do we match that up with various media vendors so that it's very easy to activate and go out and buy that media, and also get the data back out of the media vendors so that we can deduplicate it. And that means looking a lot at geographic approaches. We have to get far more interested in understanding how geography applies to both the media spends, to the retail outlets and their footprints and drive times, but also just understanding how that geography can be applied to local media at a very small town level right up to the national side. So that's what we're thinking is sort of the route forward. We're working on it and moving very, very quickly. If you have any questions or comments, of course, again, happy to see those in the LinkedIn feed down below, and happy to participate in any discussion there. Or you can hit me up on email, chris@arimadata.com. And again, if you want to discuss this further or deeper or ask any questions, happy to engage in that area. Thanks for your time for watching this video.